Welcome in, Whiskey Freaks. You're listening to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your number one attitudinal bourbon destination. I'm John Stark, and I'll be bringing you candid and sometimes irreverent whiskey news, opinions, and reviews on the industry and the products they've been bringing us for hundreds of years. First, I got to give a shout out to all you listeners tuning in each week. I'm getting amazing feedback, and I'm really super grateful for everybody taking the time to like and share and even subscribe. I'd like to ask you, please take a minute and don't forget to follow me on the Facebook and the Instagram. The more you do that, the more reach I'm going to have spreading the gospel of bourbon here on the podcast. Thanks to everyone listening all across the United States. We got folks in Ohio, in Nevada, Iowa, and Missouri. We've got some super fans there. And we got folks in 42 other states too. And I got to give a big shout out, especially to all you folks in Ireland and Germany. We got quite a few whiskey freaks in Germany. So danke to all you guys. Okay, I'm done with all the ass kissing. And we've got lots of ground to cover today. It's going to be kind of an international episode. So get your passports out and get ready to board the plane because we're headed all over the world in this episode. Today, whiskey comrades, we're going to discuss several things of interest to me, and I'm hoping that they'll be interesting to you as well. We're going to talk about Japanese whiskey trends. We're going to talk about Suntory raising prices. Barrell Bourbon's got a new release. It's very cool. I want to talk again about the state of American whiskey, and I'm going to talk about Russian whiskey, and is that actually a thing? Lastly, I'm going to review Barrell Craft Spirits' 15-year-old gray label cask strength bourbon whiskey. That's a mouthful. So here's the deal. I did it. I was able to grab Wild Turkey's 70th anniversary release. And not only that, but I got to meet the legend himself. And he signed my bottle. Now, I've been to Wild Turkey 3 or 4 other times, but damn, this was so special. So a little background story here, as the cool kids call it, the backstory. Anyway, every year in eastern Kentucky, in Mount Sterling, they hold a massive yard sale. And for lack of other words, picture a flea market, and you old folks like me remember a flea market, right? Picture that and multiply it times 10. They call this thing court days. And although I don't have enough time to go into why they call it court days, suffice it to say, everybody within 100 miles in every direction comes to this thing, and they sell everything from guns to tools to barbecue sauce, and they even had whiskey. Castle and Key and Neely family were both set up there. Anyway, this thing is massive. So the in-laws wanted us to come down and bring our son. And so right away we've got logistics issues because he's at school in Nebraska. So we flew him to Louisville. Then we drove to Louisville, picked him up, and then drove to Mount Sterling the next morning to this massive flea market thing. And that's where we met up with my wife's mom and dad. So now the good part. Okay, it was all a good part, but part of this trip turned out to be a trip to Jim Beam, where I snagged Little Book the Infinite. And naturally, if you're at Beam, you got to swing down the road just 5 miles to Four Roses Cox's Creek bottling operation. And down there, I was able to snag a gift shop exclusive that I hope I can review in coming weeks. So we had this amazing time. We ate Amish donuts. They really did have Amish donuts there in Mount Sterling. Then we had a nice visit with the in-laws, and they got to see their grandson, which frankly is what they wanted anyway, so it was all good. But the next morning, I checked the Buffalo Trace website, and sure as hell, they had Blanton's. Now, don't hate. I like Blanton's. I do not love Blanton's. But where else can you get it easily and for MSRP? And the answer to that is at the distillery. So on the way home, we grabbed some Blanton's. We grabbed some Buffalo Trace for MSRP too. And like I mentioned earlier, we stopped in at Wild Turkey. Now, if you've been to Wild Turkey before, you know Mr. Jimmy Russell, the king of whiskey. He has his own parking space, and it's up front towards the visitor center. I mean, the guy's 89 and, well, he deserves it. I mean, duh. But here's the problem. As we pulled in, there was no car in his parking space. And I'm thinking, damn. Well, I'm thinking at least maybe they'll have that 70th anniversary release. And it's no big deal. I figure I'll get over it. Not a big deal. It's probably just not my day. But as we're walking in, some gal yells across the parking lot, "Hey, Jimmy's in there signing. He's right inside the front door." I'm thinking, yes. Now I'm stoked, and I'm hoping he'll be signing for at least a couple more minutes, so give us time to get in there and get the bottles bought and everything. So we all run in, my son, my wife, and I. We grab our bottles, and we had absolutely no problem hopping right into the line. Just a couple people in front of us. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I got to visit with him for a minute while he signed my bottle. I got my picture made with him, and it was kind of funny. He even joked around a little bit with my wife. She's from Kentucky, so they had some things in common that they kind of joked about. It's pretty funny. He's just a class act. And you'll know if you've listened to the pod, I've always said complimentary things about Jimmy. And it's all true. He's gracious to everyone. He's got this dry wit that's really hard to describe unless you see it in action and in person. And I've mentioned in earlier podcast episodes how truly awesome he is. But meeting him, that just brought it right to the forefront for me. It was insane. And get this, his handwriting. He's 89 years old. He's sitting there using a paint pen on a glass bottle, and his signature looks like it was written by angels. I'm still kind of on cloud nine about the whole thing, guys, so bear with me. Now, I said we were going international today, so let's get over to Japan for a quick visit. They say, the experts say, they're warning that demand is weakening for Japanese whiskey. And I wonder if this is a harbinger for the American market or other markets in general. I really don't know. But I want to get some facts and figures together here so we can examine and maybe determine what's really going on in the Japanese market. And maybe we can extrapolate. And for those of you with infinity bottles, that means to make an educated guess or prediction. I think maybe we can extrapolate the data across whiskey markets in general. So they say, and we did, we had a big boom back in 2015 when Japanese whiskey demand soared after Yamazaki Sherry Cask 2013. It won big awards. Now, I don't know if you can really attribute a surge in an entire market to one whiskey, but the experts are saying that's when the boom really kicked off. And you know, I always trust the experts. But now demand is slowing, and in fact, sales growth has plateaued, leveled off, as more brands like Kanasuki and Fuji have entered the market, and that's increasing availability of many of these Japanese brands. According to many retailers, now this is anecdotal information, but according to many retailers, they saw a nearly 200% increase in Japanese sales over the last 5 years, and now they're seeing a slight decline compared to that peak. Now, a couple things, this is interesting here. A couple things might be contributing to this slowdown or cooling effect in the Japanese market. Now, like in the U.S. market, Japanese whiskey, including popular brands like Yamazaki 12 and 18, they're more accessible year-round now. So that thrill of the chase has kind of fizzled out. I mean, just look at Buffalo Trace. They've mastered the art of allocation. Makes us feel like we're all chasing those unicorns. But there are no unicorns in Japan anymore. It's just bottles sitting there now. And speaking of bottles just sitting around, prices on the secondary market have also dropped. Rare whiskeys like Karazawa have seen their values tumble by up to 30%. Now, I know that's a lot of facts and figures for you to digest. Suffice it to say, the market is changing. It's coming down. And they've also got a demographic shift in Japan. More women are drinking whiskey. 35% of the customer base now, which is awesome, is women. And they've got younger drinkers now. And I think they can drink at 18 over there. So that group of 18 to 35, they make up 40% of buyers now in Japan. And they're not sticking to just Japanese whiskey. They're branching out, and they're trying, get this, they're branching out and trying Chinese and Korean whiskeys. I didn't know Chinese and Korean whiskeys were a thing, And that's going to be a whole new rabbit hole I need to go down here in the near future, kids. I'm going to put that on the calendar, try to get there one of these days. Now, keep in mind, Japanese whiskey is still doing well. It's especially doing well here in the United States, where the market here grew 30% last year. So I'm going to keep an eye on the trend, and hopefully if it does continue trending downward, it's only in Japan and not here in the US. But I'm going to be honest with you, I believe we're about to see that trend here too, and very soon. Well, only time will tell, and we'll find out together here on the podcast. So Suntory is raising prices. Yeah, you know, they used to be Jim Beam, then they were Beam Suntory, and now they're just Suntory. So they plan to raise whiskey prices to adapt to what they call global economic changes, including higher tariffs. Okay. Their CEO, Takeshi Nimani, he's led the company for a decade now. He said in order to justify the price hikes, and listen to this guy's quote, to justify the price hikes, they need to enhance the image of their whiskey brands, making them seem more premium to consumers. Let that sink in for a minute. Suntory owns brands that you know like Yamazaki, Jim Beam, and Maker's Mark, and the company is now worth $11 billion. So they say to help mitigate some of the challenges they're having with higher tariffs, they're going to focus on making production more efficient and producing locally when possible. Did we really need a big shot CEO to figure that part out? Shouldn't they already be doing this? Anyway, the company plans to continue pushing the ready-to-drink market. So they're going to put together alcohol in a can. I don't know. Anyway, the company plans to continue pushing the ready-to-drink market. And they've already seen good success with that, what they say. So I guess that makes sense to them. It doesn't appeal to me to drink anything out of a can, especially my liquor, but maybe the younger folks would migrate toward that. I don't know. Now this makes a ton of sense here. Ninami says, due to societal changes like people drinking less, and that is a thing, especially the younger generation such as Gen Z, it's big time affecting the industry. We all know that during the COVID, many people spent more money on premium whiskeys. Well, that trend is gone. It's reversed. People have cut back on spending in general, not to mention that younger consumers like Gen Z, they're drinking less, or in many cases, they're not drinking anything at all. Now, I can't figure out how Mr. CEO plans on enhancing the image of their whiskey brands, making them seem more premium to consumers, as he said. In my words, that's kind of tricking you into believing that Suntory products are better than they actually are. Not sure how he's going to do that. But the long and the short of it is, kids, Suntory is going to raise prices. And naturally, the CEO failed to mention how much or exactly when. But you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be soon, and probably a pretty good boost to price. Now, I mentioned earlier about my visit to Jim Beam last week. I love taking pictures, and I took pictures of all the goodies they had for sale in the gift shop. And by goodies, I mean the liquor. I also did this back in March of this year. Guess what I found out when I compared prices for the same stuff they had just a few short months ago, and I compared it to the prices last week? You guessed it. Prices were up. And they're also charging more than 25% more on average for their whiskey pours at the bar upstairs. Yeah, they raised those prices too, guys, for the exact same stuff. And just a few short months later. Now, I'm not pissed off about it. I'm just stating facts here. I don't blame them. I mean, look around. Everything is up big time. Our house and car insurance went up 23% this year alone for absolutely no reason. Food is up. Everything is up. So Suntory is just getting with the program by raising their prices. I guess what I'm saying here, when you go, bring more dough. So Barrell Bourbon has a new release, and I really felt compelled to talk about this, and kind of led me to the review that I'm going to do in just a little bit. They've got a new release, and it's actually, they're releasing a 20-year-old version of their 15-year-old bourbon. So a little background. Barrel Craft Spirits first launched its Gray Label bourbon in 2018. They blended 15-year-old bourbons together from Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. It was well received. Now in 2024, they've re-released this whiskey, but it's been aged an additional 5 years. So it's a 20-year-old bourbon now, and it was finished in custom toasted barrels for those last 5 years. Now they held back some of the original 15-year-old whiskey. They wanted to experiment with it. They toasted barrels at low temperatures without charring them. And after 5 years of aging in these barrels, these bottles are now available, and they're going to be priced at $200. But get this, they're going to have only 150 bottles in total. And 120 of them will be sold online, and 30 of them will be sold at their Louisville location. So guess what? You'll never get your hands on any of this stuff, kids. Now, I'm sure secondary will be insane for these bottles. Probably hundreds of dollars for this stuff. So, if you just get an inheritance or that lottery ticket comes through for you, you too can have some of this super rare whiskey. All right. This is why you've got to listen to the Blind Tasting Podcast. It's almost like I'm not a dumbass. Well, I was scrolling the internets the other day, and this article popped up in my news feed. Now, remember back several episodes ago where I talked about trends in whiskey right now. Remember, I compared them to the sports card boom of the late 80s and early 90s. It's a great episode, by the way. Yeah, well, what this article says, and it's written by a guy named Kyle Swartz. He's with Beverage Dynamics, and he and I must be pals, and we didn't even know it because what he's saying about the whiskey industry is almost exactly what I told you guys a couple months ago. Now, he argues that the U.S. whiskey industry is facing some challenges right now, similar to what craft beer went through a few years ago. And I agree. Because there are too many new whiskey brands and products being launched all the time now, and at the same time, folks are spending less money because they don't have as much money. Now, as a side note, and I know this is boring economics talk here, kids, but right now, according to the latest consumer debt data from the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, U.S. credit card debt is at the highest level since the New York Fed began tracking this stuff in 1999. Now, the first question to me is, why did they not start tracking it sooner? But that's neither here nor there. I don't know the answer to that question. Anyway, what that means is folks are struggling with bills. And at the same time, they're trying to keep up with the hundreds of new whiskeys coming out each year. It's nearly impossible. So just like I said a few months back, instead of folks trying lots of different brands or blends or iterations or releases, many folks are just sticking to just a few favorites, the ones they know and love. Now, this article mentioned that other factors impacting the slowdown include things like growing drink categories like tequila. And I know tequila is really, really taking off lately. And even non-alcoholic drinks, oddly enough, and I need to talk about them at some point real soon too, and THC drinks. Those are all impacting the current situation. Even the American Craft Spirits Association recently reported that U.S. craft spirit sales are starting to decline. I'm not shocked. So does this mean the whiskey industry is in trouble? Will it end up like craft beer, which struggled after too many brewers produced too many products nobody wanted, all those damn IPAs? The answer really isn't clear yet. As far as whiskey goes, whiskey's facing similar challenges, but it's not exactly in the same situation as craft beer was. Now, industry experts, and you know how I feel about industry experts, they believe that some of the current issues may just be short-term bumps, is what they're calling it. Dave Schmier, the founder of Redemption Rye, he describes the current state of the whiskey industry as, quote, dynamic. He admits that sales are down, most especially for expensive bottles priced between $80 and $100, but he also believes that whiskey has a loyal and passionate fan base. Well, duh, we know that. He also says, though people may not be buying as much as they used to, they're still very interested in the whiskey category. Well, that doesn't mean you're going to buy stuff just because you're interested. He points out that some whiskey bottles are still sought after, that people are willing to go to great lengths to get them. Yeah, we know that. That sounds fine and dandy, Dave. But you have to have money to do all that. If you're grabbing daily drinkers And I guess now a decent bottle will run you about $35 to $50. That doesn't leave a lot of high-end whiskey buying on the shopping list, does it? I understand that during the COVID, the whiskey world saw a huge boost in sales. I get that. I was there. I remember it. And that led a lot of us to stock up and stash whiskey and build collections. But now things are returning to normal. Many folks just don't have as much cash for new bottles. And this is especially true for, and I want to talk about this, store barrel picks. I've been involved. I've seen this personally. Store picks, they used to be few and far between. We'd rush to the local liquor store as soon as we saw it come up on the Facebook or the wherever, and we'd run in there to grab it just as fast as we could. Or we'd go to our bourbon club that we belonged to grab the limited bottles. Listen, I've gleefully dropped tons of cash on these things. Emphasis on have dropped, but not recently. And why is that? Well, they're just not special anymore. They're not rare by any measure. That's what's really contributing to a decline in demand as well. Now, other experts worry that whiskey might be in decline because there are too many new products being released for the sake of innovation rather than legitimate demand. Now, this is very intriguing to me. So we've all seen this, right? We get triple oaked. We got aged in a barn. We got floated on a river barge. We got shot out of a cannon. They're getting really stupid with it, actually, at many of these distillers. And I see a lot of these crazy releases. And just like this expert says, for the sake of looking hip and cool is why they're doing it. They're not focused on quality necessarily and consistency. The last big reason that I think whiskey might be in a decline, and so does this guy, all the big guys have ramped up production big time. I said that in an episode weeks ago. Like I told you, we are headed for a glut of whiskey. Now, I'm going to try to stay positive here, right? And no matter what these experts or anybody says, I love bourbon, I love whiskey, and frankly, I'm going to keep buying it. And I'm going to be looking for the old standbys that I love. And I'm going to be looking for some of the trendy new stuff, no doubt, when I have extra cash. Now, what I hope is, I hope the distilleries realize that just pumping out new stuff for the sake of doing it, that may not work out well for them in the long term. Sometimes, and I've said this before, sometimes folks just want to drink their wild turkey and be happy. It's consistent, quality, it's reasonably priced, and I think I'm right here to a certain degree. Look, people who used to go into the liquor store and come out with 2 bottles, well, they're coming out with 1 bottle now. At least that's what I'm seeing. Yeah, I know it's somewhat anecdotal, but you look around. Ask your buddies. Are you buying the same as before? I think the answer is you're not. Look, the distilleries are going to have to focus on quality and affordability so they can continue to thrive and we can all continue to enjoy whiskey without maxing out the credit cards or getting a payday loan on the way to the liquor store. So what's true right now? Well, the whiskey industry is going through a tough time. If we trust the experts, well, they say it's not the beginning of the end. They see this as a period of transition or a market correction, so to speak. What do I think? I think only time will tell. Now, I'm going to keep my eye on this, kids. You just tune in here to get updates periodically. And as always, it's free of charge. So Russian whiskey. It's international today. Is Russian whiskey really a thing? Now, before I get started, I want to make it clear right up front that because I'm discussing Russian whiskey, I'm not endorsing the war. These folks over there that are making the whiskey in Russia didn't start the war, and they probably don't even support it themselves, quite frankly. So I got to get out front on that. I don't want to talk about wars. I want to talk about whiskey. Now, this brand caught my eye the other day, and I thought, hey, I wonder what whiskey looks like in Russia. So here we are talking about it. Now, we've all known that vodka comes from Russia, but whiskey? It is a thing there. And what does the whiskey industry look like in Russia? Well, I did a little research and I want to share it with you briefly. Now, it's only going to take a minute, kids. The whiskey industry in Russia is relatively young, but it's rapidly growing. They say Russians are consuming more and more whiskey, especially premium whiskeys, which is intriguing. In fact, whiskey consumption in Russia has been jumping in the last decade, like the annual growth rates are often exceeding 5% a year. So they're drinking whiskey. And believe it or not, they can still get Jim Beam and Jack Daniels and those brands that are available across Russia. And the people that are drinking those are mostly the younger drinkers. But what kind of whiskey do the folks in Russia really prefer? Well, it turns out they prefer Scottish whiskey. It's the most popular, especially the single malts. They like Johnny Walker, Glenfiddich, and those and many others, that are widely available. They do like some Irish whiskeys like Jameson to a certain degree, but like I said, they really prefer Scottish single malts. Now, in recent years, Russian distillers have begun experimenting with whiskey production. There's reasons for that. Number one, they're trying to create a distinctly Russian product that can compete with imported brands. And that's because these domestic producers in Russia are looking to fill gaps left by foreign companies that stopped operating in Russia over the war in Ukraine. But needless to say, their domestic whiskey market is growing in leaps and bounds now. And that's where my discussion kind of leads us. I want to talk about Kemla Distillery. Kemla Distillery is situated, it's in a rural village in the Republic of Mordovia, Russia. Now, where the hell is that? It's 300 miles southeast of Moscow, the capital of Russia. Very cold there in the winter. And it only gets up to an average of 66 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And that's interesting to me that they're making whiskey somewhere where it just doesn't warm up a lot. So it'd be interesting to try the whiskey that they're aging there. Now, the history of the distillery is fascinating. The Kemla Distillery was founded by hereditary nobleman Stepan Stepanovich Kratkov in 1828. So they've been distilling at this distillery since 1828. That's nearly 200 years they've been active. But recently, in 2022, they came out with releases of single malt Russian whiskey for the very first time. And this is the cool part to me. They age in Russian rock oak barrels from the Black Sea region of Russia. The folks at the distillery say they did this, they took a big risk, really, using that type of oak, but they took that risk in order to give their whiskey what they call Russian character. What that means to them is, well, check this out. They say what that really means is, and what they're saying is, Black Sea oak gives unique notes of spices reminiscent of those sprinkled on Borodino bread. I didn't know what the heck Borodino bread was, so I looked it up. Borodino bread has a mild sweetness, a sour tang, earthy rye, and warm spice from coriander seeds. It's super rich, and it's got a really complex flavor. They call the single malt Russian whiskey that they make simply Russian oak. Now, this one was aged 6 years. It comes in at 101.8 proof, and it costs somewhere around $125 US. Now, they also have another single malt they call Balkan Virgin. To come up with some intriguing stuff. That comes in at 98.4 proof, and that's a cask strength. It comes in a beautiful wooden box. It was only aged 4 years. It was non-chill filtered. It costs about the same as the Russian oak at $124. Now, you might be thinking, that's a lot of cash, especially in Russia. And, well, it is. It's about 20 times higher than the average bottle of vodka in Russia. But get what Gennady Silvanov says. He's their master blender at the distillery. This is funny. He says, the maths is simple. A Russian man would buy 1 bottle of a quality liquor instead of 10 bottles of cheap stuff like vodka or something like it and drink less. I think I'll end the segment on that note, kids. Suffice it to say, when this war is over, and if I can find it, I want to give this stuff a try. It sounds really cool. And if I do, you'll be the first to hear about it. All right, whiskey freaks, let's get to the fun part now. My review of Barrell Craft 15-year-old gray label bourbon whiskey. It's more specifically the 2021 release. This whiskey was put together by Barrell Craft Spirits out of Louisville, and they've been around since 2013 when Joe Beatrice launched the Barrell Craft Spirits Company. Now, the interesting thing about Joe is instead of building his own distillery, he, quote, questioned the conventional wisdom and took a different course. He sourced and blended exceptional casks from established producers, bottled whiskeys at cask strength, and sold them as transparently as possible, end quote. So they pride themselves at Barrell on using science and blending as the focus rather than making the same old stuff over and over. That's them, not me. That's what they say. It's not unusual now when you think about other blenders, maybe like Dark Arts, and there are others, who are sourcing the barrels and then they really are meticulously blending them. It seems to be a solid business model for these guys. There's less overhead, lower costs, all that good stuff. Now, I picked up my bottle for $239, which was MSRP when it was released a few years ago. So at least I didn't pay secondary. My bottle is number 5632. It says so right on the bottle. The bottle, I like to mention the shape of the bottle. It has rounded shoulders, and many of the Barrelcraft whiskey bottles have rounded or sloping shoulders. Kind of gives them a soft appearance, and then the body of the bottle is wider than most of your standard whiskey bottles. It's got a short neck, which is thick. It's got a heavy glass base, which really does give it a premium look and feel. It's got this really nice heavy cork stopper, or metal cork stopper. It's not a plastic crappy screw top. The bottle also has beautiful silver embossing of the word bourbon on it, and it's hand numbered, which kind of adds an exclusive or high-end feel to it. The bottle comes in a gorgeous, sturdy display box. It's a pretty nice touch, especially when you're paying this kind of cash for something. It's nice to get a box to protect it from UV light. Now, this bourbon whiskey comes in at 100.4 proof, and it's cask strength. Like I said, I think everything they do there is cask strength. It was aged 15 years. And where does it come from? Well, like I think I mentioned earlier, they source their whiskey. This is not any exception to that rule. This was distilled and aged in Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and it's blended together from those places. I think probably there's some in here from MGP, probably some from Dickel, and I don't know where the Kentucky piece of this puzzle comes from. I can't find it anywhere that tells me where in Kentucky. Now, I know they talk about they want to be transparent at Barrell, but it shouldn't be that difficult to figure it out. But anyway, that drives me crazy when a company is not forthcoming about the origins and other pertinent info. I know they're not really hiding anything, but it still doesn't quite feel right to me. So the BS, description on the Barrelcraft website says, and try not to laugh, kids, they say, quote, a bourbon characterized by evolution where some whiskeys display their complexity all at once. Here the flavors remain focused yet ephemeral. A gentle minerality yields to candied scents and then savory earthy ones, fruity aromas, and finally herbs and spices. The palate, meanwhile, is bright and sweet and tastes of cola. So lots of gobbledygook and word salad here. My BS detector is going off like a Geiger counter at Chernobyl. Not only are they proud of it as far as price, but it seems like the good folks at Barrell employ the finest marketing gurus to wordsmith the description for them. Honestly, this is the kind of jargon that turns me off right away. But I'm going to try to remain unbiased on this review. But quite frankly, we're not off to a great start. So the mash bill is not disclosed. And that flies in the face of what Joe just said earlier when he said transparency. So again, I'm not thrilled about that. If Jim Beam and others can blend stuff like Little Book and tell you what's in it, I really see no reason why Barrell couldn't do the same. It's just one of my pet peeves, kids. Moving on. The color, I say it's something like a reddish bronze. Now that's looking through the bottle. I haven't poured it in the glass yet. Now, of course, the color is probably irrelevant, especially if you're counting on me for that piece of the puzzle. But it sometimes gives you an idea of the breadth of flavors you're about to receive in your mouth. In my opinion, the darker the hue of the whiskey, the deeper the flavors. That's not always true, but it is a lot of times. It's worth noting, and I will every single time. Today I'm tasting with a plain old Glencairn glass. Let me crack this open, pull out that fancy cork. Okay. So I'm going to give it a little nosing. I'm getting like a dusty cherry wood thing going on. It's kind of like, have you ever grilled out and you've used those wood chips in the barbecue grill to smoke, whether like mesquite or apple? They also have cherry. This smells like that to me. I'm getting like a yummy custard note, like a vanilla custard maybe. And a lot of fruitiness. It's maybe strawberry. It smells great. They're kind of untraditional notes here, but I don't know. I honestly have not had a lot of 15-year-old whiskey, so maybe this is something that you can expect. Let me get a sip. Do that little bit of that Kentucky chew. Thank you, Booker No. Okay, so I'm instantly getting the flavor of like flat cherry Coke soda. We call it soda here. Definitely cherry Coke. Pop. I guess some of y'all call it pop, depending on what part of the country you live in. Here in St. Louis, we say soda. I'm also getting a lot of rough oak. Maybe some pecan shell. And what I mean by pecan shell, it's different than pecan. Pecan shells taste really earthy and acidic. Now, I know this because I accidentally popped one into my mouth one day and I gave it a good chewing before I realized it was not the pecan, it was the pecan shell. You never, ever, ever want to try eating a pecan shell. Just a word of the wise. And as always, it's free of charge. Let me take another sip. Still getting a ton of flat cherry Coke. Now the finish does have a tinge of spearmint. Maybe very, very light mint. It's not bad, but as it fades away, I'm getting a chalky cherry. This is weird. So, anybody out there remember what postage stamp? You remember postage stamps where we used to mail stuff and we used to have to lick them when you licked one to put it on the envelope? Anybody remember that? What that tasted like? Well, I found it. I found that flavor right here at the end of this finish. That is no bueno. For those of you in Germany, schlecht. Schlecht. So, what's the verdict? I'll have the answer right after the money spot. Are you looking to update your bar or man cave with some great photographs or wall art? Head over to Etsy at famousdocs.etsy.com and pick up some fantastic prohibition, bourbon, whiskey, and gangster-related photographs and art. And if you purchase 4 or more items, you'll get 20% off your entire order for a limited time. That's famousdocs.etsy.com. famousdocs.etsy.com. So we all know here on the Blind Tasting Podcast, we have 3 verdict options. Are we going to keep it, collect it, or cull it? To keep it means to proudly display it in your liquor cabinet or bar. This stuff is good for a pour anytime, but there's really no need to stock up on it since it's always available. Collect it. Grab another bottle or two since you find it so darn delicious, or it just may not be easy to get a hold of. Or the last option, cull it. Use it to loosen rusty bolts or sanitize a dirty toilet. In the case of Barrell Craft Gray Label 15-year-old bourbon whiskey, I say keep it. Now I say that begrudgingly. I spent a crap ton of money on this because the previous release, according to one of those whiskey big shot gurus that you see on the internet, they said it was amazing. So, like a dumbass, I rushed out. Now, this is thanks to my wife, and I got to give her credit. She saw it on the Facebook at the local liquor store, and it was right before my birthday a few years ago. I thank her for that, but we rushed out, we bought this bottle, and I was really happy to drop that stupid money on it because I expected it to be amazing. It is not amazing. If I could trade it to somebody who liked it, I'd probably trade it for anything around $100. Okay, hang on, kids. Give me just a sec. Let me jump on the computer real quick and pull up this stuff on the Barrell Bourbon website. I must be missing something. I paid almost $250 for this, and it ain't worth $100. So I got to take a quick look here. Okay, so the good folks at Barrel Craft say all kinds of things about the tasting notes. They take 2 paragraphs here, I'm looking at it, to tell about the taste and finish of this stuff. So I'm not going to bore you with all of that. Believe me, the marketing team, they worked overtime on this one, kids. Not going to lie. If it were as good as they said here, I'd be hoarding every bottle I could find. Now, I've had other expressions from Barrell, and they've been good. Some of them have been amazing. They just missed the mark here, in my opinion. Okay, so this is what I call a double cross. On the nose, this Barrell Craft 15-year gray label, 100.4 proof bourbon whiskey, it came off amazing. And I've never gotten the kind of notes on the nose from anything else ever. So to me, this is a double cross where they suck you in on the nose, and when you taste it and the finish, it's no bueno. I'm still going to try other Barrell Craft offerings, but I will not be dropping this kind of cash anytime soon without having a pour at a bar or a buddy's house first. It's always just my opinion here, and it's always free of charge. Last but not least, I got to give a shout out to the farmers, distillery production guys and gals, the warehouse workers, the bottlers and truck drivers. They're the ones that make it happen. So cheers to all of them. Well, that's all I got for today, Whiskey Freaks. Thanks for listening to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your #1 attitudinal bourbon destination.